We're taking things back, way back, to number 1. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Geek Pantheon. I am Eric, and today we're going to try out a new series. I'm going to call it Throwback Thursday because I'm not that creative, and this video is releasing on a Thursday. But the idea is we're going to be looking back at some old adventures, starting off with some shorter adventures in Dungeon Magazine, because Dungeon Magazine is a treasure trove of adventures and just plot hooks and ideas that a lot of people overlook. But I wanted to take a look at the first adventure in the first Dungeon Magazine and do a review and kind of hold it up against modern sensibilities, in the sense of, obviously nowadays Dungeons and Dragons is very narrative focused. It is a storytelling medium that we collectively, get together and tell stories at the table. Obviously, when Dungeon Magazine was started back in first edition days, it was a very different game, and the purpose of the game was very different. So I want to take a look at some of these older adventures, and I'm planning on doing all editions going forward up to 4th edition, back when Dungeon Magazine was still being produced for that, and look at adventures and do reviews and recommendations and ways to tweak them and things like that. And if that sounds interesting to you, give the video a like. Subscribe to the channel. Let me know down below if there are any Dungeon Magazine adventures that you recall fondly that you've ran before or gotten to play in before that you want me to take a look at. Let me know down below. So the very first adventure of the very first Dungeon Magazine is called The Dark Tower of Cabilar. So this is a location adventure. Like, it is centered around going to a place and then getting out of that place with the thing that you are trying to get. There is a box of text that tells you, okay, here's what the players would know going into it. There's no lead in. It basically gives you the adventure hook in a box of text to read to the players, where it's like, hey, there was this king who got killed and everybody in his court got killed, but one of his loyal assistants got his son out, and the son is with his godparents now. But in order to legitimize his rule, they need his emerald crown, which they have tracked down to this dark tower, and his godmother has hired you to go track it down. And you find yourselves following a guide towards the cave where the tower is located. That's how the adventure kicks off. So obviously, if I were running it nowadays, there would be some role play with the godmother, maybe get to meet the prince, finding out about this history organically rather than info dump. But that's how it's presented here. But it gives you the entire backstory to work with. So as a dungeon master, you can look at that and build it out, which is enough for me anyway, looking at an old adventure like this. So just know that what you're getting for this adventure is literally the location. It is extremely detailed in that regard. It's over a dozen pages of just room after room after room, with combat encounters and traps and puzzles and all that kind of stuff. It's a dungeon in tower form, but don't expect a grand sweeping story from this, is all I'm trying to say. One thing I really love about this adventure, written by Michael Ashton and Lee Sperry. You get a little lovely bio of them at the beginning of the adventure. But one thing that I love about the way that they wrote these adventures, and quick disclaimer, I started playing this game in 4th edition. I know how adventures are written for 4th edition. I've read a lot of adventures written for 3.5. Older than that, I am not the most well-versed D&D historian. This series will hopefully assist in that. But if I point out something is notable in the way this adventure is written, and it was just the way all adventures are written back then, I don't know that. You can let me know down in the comments that I'm a dummy and I should know better. That's fine. Feel free. But I'm learning, and yeah, we're going to move on. So as I was saying, something notable that I really like is they go into a lot of detail with the monster tactics and what the monsters do at what certain points in terms of their health and things like that. And it's very dynamic. It's okay, they're going to use these abilities and things like that until they hit this certain HP threshold, and then they're going to do this. The good example is the initial combat encounter. The party has to scale the tower because the only way of getting in is there is a window on each side of the tower 90 feet up. That's the only way to get in. And there's some ledges that you can stop along the way going up. But as the party starts to scale, 4 fire drakes attack because they have a nest on top of the tower that has their eggs in it. So they are defending their nest, which means they're not going to run away and retreat. They're protecting their children. So they are going to fight to the death. And it lays it out very clearly. They're going to fly around and shoot fire at the party from a distance until they hit halfway down their hit points. And then because they're so wounded, you can describe their wings getting damaged or something like that. They come and land on a ledge and next to a party member and start attacking in melee. And then if they get down to less than 5 hit points, they just go the fire drakes, I guess in this edition, had a property where their blood was literally boiling and fire damage. So they thrash themselves and then dive bomb the party, basically becoming sentient fireballs that they just, you're going to kill me, but I would rather take you with me to protect my children. I dig that tactic. I like that a lot. I think that is really fun and inventive. Not fun as an aha, but you get what I'm saying. From a meta standpoint, it's really fun. And that is peppered throughout this entire adventure of that level of detail in terms of the monster tactics and what they're doing and what their mindset is. And it's very understandable why the monsters are doing what they're doing. It does give a caveat at the beginning of the adventure. All of the monsters, save for the fire drakes that exist just in the cave where this tower is located, all the monsters inside the tower are there by compulsion and magical charm. So if they act oddly, it's due to magic. It's a it's a good, easy way out of why are the orcs acting this way? Magic. But basically, the Lord of the Tower has compelled all these monsters to be there, has bound them to this place, and they want for nothing. Magically, it's not that they're well taken care of. They're just literally suppressed into not wanting anything other than to defend the tower. And so it is set up in a very dungeon crawly, you enter the room and you are attacked kind of thing. The orcs that are in this tower are ready to attack you as soon as you enter the room. But there's a pretty clever reason for that. There's different levels of the dungeon. And the very first room that you enter in the dungeon where the orcs are, there's a shrieker in the very first room that screams as soon as you enter it, which justifies everything on that level being ready. That's smart dungeon design. If you want to have all the monsters be prepared, then throw something in like that. It might seem cheap from a player standpoint, but then again, if you have a hyper paranoid dark wizard that lives in a tower, they're going to do stuff like this. They're going to have a home alarm system. Deal with it. So I do like that there was some care put into why would the orcs be ready to attack as soon as the party enters their room? Well, they heard the shrieker. Done. It does give you a warning, and then it continues to remind you throughout the adventure, walking order matters because there are a lot of traps, and how people are affected by traps obviously is reliant upon walking order. And so as a dungeon master, if you see this in an adventure or you want to design something of your own, I would give that same disclaimer to the party of hey, just so you know, I'm going to occasionally ask for updates on walking order. Or if you would like to just have a set walking order, you can tell me at the beginning of the adventure, and I will just stick with that, assuming throughout that it does not change unless you all tell me so. And if you're going to ask throughout, then I would do a couple false alarms of okay, you're entering this room and who's in front? Okay, you are? Okay, cool. And then just move on. So they don't always know that as soon as you ask, that means, oh crap. So, but I do like that they give you that disclaimer and they constantly remind you. And obviously traps like tripwires or pressure plates, things like that are going to affect the front person in the party more than somebody at the back. In the big orc fight in room 32, there's a bunch of orcs and they're firing ballistas at the party. Some of them are. And something interesting mechanically that they did is because ballistas are obviously siege weaponry, it basically calls out that it treats all AC as 10 against the player characters because they're such a powerful weapon that, regular personal armor isn't going to do anything against something that's meant to like break stone or like large wooden structures, things like that. That's just an interesting mechanical concept. Genesis/Star Wars does something similar with like personal damage versus vehicular damage, where obviously weapons designed to affect vehicles or buildings would affect people differently. And basically they just do a 10 times modifier. Like if it's 1 point of vehicular damage, it's 10 points of personal damage. But I think that AC, that's an interesting thing. That's something just that I read, and I took a note and I'm going to think on it, because the idea of like a catapult being equally affected, like a giant stone being thrown from catapult being equally affected as a mace being swung in the arm of somebody, is kind of silly when it comes to your armor class. So that's just something that I noted and thought was interesting, and I thought I would say it here. So yeah, sometimes when it talks about weighing things, it measures it in currency, like get the weight under 5,000 gold pieces. Is this an old school D&D thing that I was unaware of, or is it a typo? Was it supposed to be LB instead of GP? That was wild to me. Like, how much does one gold piece weigh? I don't know, but I don't know how many gold pieces I weigh as a person, but apparently in this adventure, I need to know. Old school D&D is so weird, man. At one point, it talks about a dwarf that is able to detect shifting rooms in italics, as if that were a skill that a character would have, detects shifting rooms, because there's an elevator that moves slowly. And the only way that you could tell that you're in it is if a dwarf member of your party detects shifting rooms. Really good dungeon design here. So the big orc fight that happens about halfway through, the orcs hit a point where they will fall back and retreat in that fight. The dungeon has a specific room with defensible positions that the orcs have set up that they fall back to. And they're in a more defensible position. When the party gets to them, the fight can continue, but the orcs now have a bit more of an advantage defensively, because obviously the strong offensive maneuver that they made when they first encountered the party wasn't the right tactics. So they go back, they change tactics, and they try again. But now they have the drop on the party. Smart. Like, yes, if you're in a dungeon scenario or a castle scenario or just an enclosed space and you have forces that retreat, because I talk about this often, that like, have your monsters be smart, have them weigh the cost of staying in the fight. But if they retreat, where do they go? What do they do? In this dungeon, like they very clearly say, they fall back to a defensible position and they ready themselves to attack the party once they reach them. Smart. I did do a bit of checking on the monsters in this, because it's graded as a 4th to 7th level adventure for 4 to 8 characters, which 8 characters. And I checked some of the CRs just to see, how well this would translate. Pretty well. You go up against a chimera at one point, and it's a CR6. Granted, if you have 8 party members going up against a single chimera, I don't care if that thing is CR15, the party's going to win just due to the action economy most of the time. So yeah, I mean, you have CR6. If you have like 4 4th level party members, that's going to be a pretty good fight. Pretty good fight. And you also have a Wraith that shows up at CR5. You have like 6 Shadows show up, and those are each CR1/2, which, the CR is a little low, but action economy wise, and also strength drain is poof. So yeah, from a monster standpoint, you're not going to have to do too much tweaking. And even, like red guard drakes in 5th edition are CR2. So 4 of those. You have a CR8 encounter. You go up against an Etna at one point, which is CR4, which is a little low. So you might want to add some additional mobs. But like I said, the amount of translation that's necessary is actually surprisingly minimal, I would say. So when you get to the big bad at the end of the dungeon, the big bad is a vampire. Spoilers. That he's like lounging in his coffin when you arrive, and is surrounded by 10 other coffins that have skeletons decked out in armor and arms and things like that. And they come out and attack the party. And that's the initial bit of the encounter. But surrounding the big bad's coffin is a 30-foot deep pit that's covered by an illusion to where it just looks like a floor. So if a fighter sprints at them, they're just going to whoop. And then after 4 rounds, the floor of that 30-foot pit slides to open up to a lava pit that's instant death for any character that falls into it. Old school D&D, you're crazy. Also, looking at the treasure for this room and all the rooms previously, crazy generous with magic items and currency. If you're running a campaign where you don't want the party to just splash cash everywhere, then maybe adjust the treasure a bit that they're getting throughout. And obviously the magic items aren't going to translate for one from first edition to fifth edition. So definitely do your homework in that translation. And some stuff just doesn't exist in fifth edition, so you'll need to find comparable things. But there are a lot of magic items and a lot of money that gets thrown around in this dungeon. And hey, the lava pit is part of a puzzle. It's not just a jerk trap. So basically the skeletons that you're fighting, as soon as you kill one, another one emerges from one of the coffins, never ending. And the only way to stop that is to push the coffins that the skeletons are emerging from into the lava pit. And there's a time, like you can't do it really until after 4 rounds. So you do have to do some combat before you figure out what's going on. And I feel like the puzzle will be pretty well telegraphed for players in that you see the skeletons are walking out of these coffins. So if we get rid of the coffins into the lava pit, then at the very least, the skeletons will be walking out into lava. So I like this from an encounter design standpoint. I think this is really smart and really clever. As long as your party can pick up on it. Maybe waiting 4 rounds might be a bit too long. Maybe narrow it down to 2. And it does specifically say that the floor starts moving. And at the 4th round, it's impossible for somebody to avoid falling into the pit. So after 1 or 2 rounds, you could say that the gap is enough to where you could shove it down in there. And you could start pushing coffins down into that pit before. And the skeletons are just down there trying to get out. So I really like this puzzle. I like this encounter. I think it's designed pretty smartly. And the final puzzle is there's a ring that you get off the Etten, like 2 floors up. It's a very funny Etten named Ned and Fred, except Fred keeps forgetting his name. But they're wearing a ring, and it's the MacGuffin of the adventure. You need it to get to the crown to complete everything. So if you're running this, very much telegraph the importance of the ring that the Etten is wearing. It does a good job in the adventure of writing, like they use a power from the ring that's really powerful. And if you identify it, like you get like plus 10 HP while wearing it. And so it's a pretty valuable thing that you would want to wear. And so the ring is telegraphed pretty well in the adventure. But when you're running it, you definitely want to emphasize, take this ring with you. And as soon as somebody puts it on, they get a message in their head that is spooky. And the ring also lies to them. It says, in order to complete the adventure, you must like walk me into the fiery pit. When in actuality, you can just take the ring off and chuck it in there and you do it. But the Godmother gives the party 30,000 gold pieces for completing this adventure. 30,000 gold pieces. 4th level characters. 30,000 gold pieces. That's a lot of money in campaigns that I typically run. That would be dropped down a bit. Honestly, that's an insane amount of money. But yeah, that's once again, splashing the cash in this dungeon, in this adventure. So what do I think about this adventure? As written, it's a little rough because it is just a location. You know, if you take some time to flesh out the story of it, actually have the party, you know, meet the prince or meet the godmother, and, you know, have this adventure be something that the party can be invested in from a narrative and storytelling standpoint, I think it'd be pretty cool. From a design standpoint, the monsters are kind of thrown together, having they're all magically compelled to be here. Justifies kind of the ramshackle nature of, like, you have a mimic that's pretending to be a stare, and now you have an Etten, and now you have a giant group of orcs, and now you have a wraith, and now you have a chimera. So there's very little theme when it comes to the dungeon in terms of the monsters being presented, other than the fact that you're told they are magically compelled to be there, and they're kind of a menagerie that this like dark lord has gathered in his tower to protect him from any potential adventurers, and specifically to protect against anybody getting the crown. because, you know, part of the backstory is this Cabilar like overthrew the king and like destroyed the court, and so he doesn't want the prince to return to the throne. So maybe switching out some of the monsters, making it more of a, you know, a force that's dedicated to Cabilar could make it a bit more satisfying from a narrative standpoint. But from a design standpoint, it's a dungeon crawl. If you got players that don't like dungeon crawls, they might not like this because there are a lot of rooms to go through, 45 total rooms to be exact. But I will say there isn't a whole lot of wasted space in the dungeon. Like it's not like there's like a third of the rooms are empty or just storage facilities. Like there's a lot going on. There's a lot of story to be told through the dungeon itself, which I appreciate. And even the rooms that aren't like on the definitive path towards the end of the dungeon contain valuable items that can be used. They aren't necessary to be used. It's not like you're going to have to backtrack 3 levels unless you forgot to take the Enton's Ring. But there are things that are very useful for the adventure head, but aren't required. So I think from a dungeon design standpoint, this is really well done. Scale back on the magic items, scale back on the gold is all I would say from like a modern D&D sensibility. And that's it. That's all you really need to tweak. I enjoyed it. There's some cool magic items in here. The Ring of Night is a very powerful, very cool magic item, but it has to be destroyed in order to leave or in order to complete the adventure. I guess you could go back up and hop out of tower and just take the Ring of Night with you. But 30,000 gold pieces, not each. You got to split that, darn. But still. So I really enjoyed this adventure. Did you all enjoy this video concept? Did you all enjoy me diving into an old adventure? Let me know down below. And be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thank you all so much for watching. Bye.